The night of the family dinner wasn't just another evening, it was the night I was told I didn't belong. My name is Nicole Hayes. I'm 32 years old, and for most of my life, I believed if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, and proved myself enough, maybe my parents would finally see me. Maybe one day they'd stop comparing me to my siblings, stop making me feel like a ghost in my own home. I thought that night would be different. Instead, it became the moment that burned itself into me forever. The dining room smelled of roasted chicken and garlic bread. Laughter floated across the long oak table where my parents, my brother Daniel, and my sister Claire were already seated. The chandelier above shimmered against the wine glasses. I hovered near the doorway, clutching my purse like a shield. For a moment, I let myself imagine being welcomed, maybe even celebrated. "Nicole," my father's voice cut through, sharp and deliberate. He didn't smile. He didn't gesture for me to sit. He simply said the words that froze me in place. "You're not ready to sit with us yet." The air shifted. My mother's eyes flicked to me, cold and assessing, before she turned back to refill Claire's glass. Daniel smirked, tapping his fork against his plate as though waiting for a show. I stood there stunned, while the clink of silverware filled the silence my presence created. Do you know what it feels like when your family tells you, without hesitation, that you don't deserve a seat at their table? It's like the floor beneath you gives way, and yet no one else notices. I tried to speak, but my throat tightened. "What do you mean?" My voice came out softer than I wanted, almost pleading. My father didn't flinch. He took another bite of chicken, chewing slowly before answering. "You're not there yet, Nicole. You still have a lot to prove." Claire leaned back in her chair, her diamond earrings catching the light. "Don't take it personally. Dad just means you should work harder. Be more like Daniel." Daniel chuckled, lifting his wine glass in mock salute. "No offense, sis, but you do kind of play small league. While I'm closing deals in New York and Claire's making partner at the firm, you're—" He paused, pretending to search for the right word. "Still figuring things out, right?" Heat flushed my cheeks. They knew I worked as an assistant project coordinator at an event planning company in downtown Phoenix. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid my bills. Last month, I'd finally cleared my credit card debt. I was proud of that. Still, in this room, in their eyes, none of it mattered. "Daniel," I said, trying to steady my voice, "you know I've managed entire conferences. I've been promoted twice in 5 years. That doesn't mean anything?" My mother sighed as if the sound of my defense was a burden. "Nicole, it's not about promotions. It's about stability, image. We can't keep pretending you're ready when you're not." Their words stung sharper than I expected. I glanced at the table, every plate perfectly set, every seat filled, except the one I thought would be mine. "Where am I supposed to sit then?" I asked, my chest tight. My father looked at me calmly, without a hint of hesitation. "Not here. Not tonight." The words landed like a slap. I wanted to argue, to scream, to demand the respect I'd been begging for my whole life. But something inside me went quiet instead. I realized no matter what I said, their decision had already been made. I noticed the small things then. The way Daniel leaned in closer to Claire, whispering something that made her laugh. The way my mother reached for my father's hand, as if they were united in this judgment. The way not a single person at that table looked like they missed me. A chair scraped against the floor. My cousin Lily, who had been seated near the end, shifted uncomfortably. Her eyes flicked to me, full of pity, then back down to her plate. She didn't say a word. No one did. And maybe that silence was the cruelest part of all. I stood there, feeling the weight of every eye in the room, every second stretching longer than the last. My pulse hammered in my ears. My palms burned where I gripped the strap of my purse. I thought about all the birthdays I'd spent saving for their gifts, the nights I worked late to help cover their bills, the times I stayed quiet just to keep the peace. None of it mattered now, because in one sentence, they had shattered me. The oak table gleamed under the chandelier, but I saw it differently now. It wasn't a table, it was a barrier, a line drawn between who belonged and who didn't, and I was standing on the outside. I didn't cry, I didn't beg, I didn't move. I just stood frozen, swallowing the lump in my throat, realizing the truth I had avoided my entire life. That night, under their unblinking stares, I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was their shame. The room went quiet, except for the echo of their words burning in my ears. I stood there, rooted to the spot, clutching my purse strap so tightly my knuckles turned white. My father's voice replayed in my head, each syllable slicing deeper. "You're not ready to sit with us yet." The dining room suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in. My heart pounded, not from anger, not even from sadness, just the hollow weight of humiliation. Across the table, my brother Daniel leaned back in his chair, a smirk curling on his lips. He didn't need to say anything. His eyes said it all, see? "You'll never be one of us." My sister Claire tilted her wine glass, swirling the deep red liquid with exaggerated calm. "Don't take it so seriously, Nicole," she said, her tone laced with mock sympathy. "Dad just means, oh, you haven't lived up to what's expected yet." The words weren't meant to comfort me. They were meant to remind me of my place. My throat tightened, but I forced out a whisper. "Expected by who? By you?" Daniel chuckled, raising his glass. "By reality." Their laughter, light, cruel, and careless, rang louder than the clinking of silverware. I glanced at the others seated at the table. My aunt shifted uncomfortably in her seat, avoiding my eyes. My uncle cleared his throat, focusing on his plate as if the chicken suddenly needed all his attention. Even my cousin Lily, who usually texted me jokes under the table at dinners like this, kept her gaze fixed on her food. Not one person spoke up. Not one person defended me. And that silence cut deeper than my father's words. Do you know that feeling? When a room full of people hears you being humiliated, and instead of stepping in, they quietly side with the stronger voice? That's when you realize the crowd doesn't protect you. It buries you. I wanted to scream, to demand that they see me, really see me. But the weight of their stares pinned me down like a moth under glass. My voice cracked instead. After everything I've done for this family, I'm still not enough? My mother finally looked at me, her face unreadable. "Nicole, don't make a scene. Sit quietly somewhere else or go home if this makes you uncomfortable." Go home. As if this wasn't my home. As if I was just a visitor who had overstayed my welcome. Claire leaned closer to Daniel, whispering something that made him laugh under his breath. My humiliation had become their entertainment. I glanced around the room again. My aunt finally looked up, meeting my eyes for a split second. There was pity there, but pity wasn't the same as courage. She looked down just as quickly. In that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. They didn't see me as their daughter, their niece, their sister. They saw me as their mistake, and mistakes don't get seats at the table. The chandelier glowed above, casting warm light over the polished oak table, the fine china, the gleaming cutlery. Everything looked perfect, except for me. I was the flaw in their perfect family portrait, the smudge they'd rather erase. I bit the inside of my cheek to stop the tears from spilling. My pulse hammered so loud I thought they could hear it. Do you think I should have spoken up right then? Thrown their words back at them? Exposed every hypocrisy every time I'd bailed them out or sacrificed for their comfort? Or was my silence the sharper weapon? Because as I stood there, swallowing every ounce of pain, something shifted. My humiliation was real, yes, but so was my clarity. Daniel's smirk, Claire's dismissal, my parents' coldness, they weren't just wounds. They were proof. Proof that I had never belonged at that table, not because of who I was, but because of who they refused to be. The chatter slowly returned around me. Forks clinked against plates. Laughter bubbled again, as if my exclusion was nothing more than a commercial break in their evening. And I realized then, I wasn't invisible to them. I was worse. I was their shame. The night after that dinner, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the silence of my apartment louder than any words they had spoken. Their voices haunted me, replaying again and again. "You're not ready to sit with us yet." But what cut deeper wasn't just the exclusion. It was the history behind it, the years of sacrifices they had conveniently forgotten. I remembered the nights I stayed late at my accounting job, balancing numbers under the harsh glow of fluorescent lights. My paycheck wasn't much, but when the mortgage on their house in Glendale was falling behind, I slipped $600 from my own rent budget and wired it to Dad. He never thanked me. He just said, "You should be more responsible with your money." That memory still stung. There was another time, Claire's first year at law school. She called me at 11 p.m., crying because she couldn't afford her books. I was working as a barista back then, barely making $12 an hour. But I sent her $400 every dollar I had in my savings account. The next week at family dinner, she bragged about acing her classes. She never mentioned where the money came from. Even Daniel, my golden boy brother, once showed up at my apartment in Tempe with his face pale and his hands shaking. His car had been repossessed. He needed $200 to get it back. I maxed out my credit card to help him. He drove away the next morning without even saying goodbye. Tell me, how do you keep giving to people who only remember your absence, never your presence? As the memories stacked, I felt my sadness start to twist into something else. Anger. It wasn't the fiery, screaming kind of anger. It was the quiet kind. The kind that builds silently, layering like storm clouds you pretend not to see. Until lightning strikes. I remembered how Mom always praised Claire for her ambition, telling everyone how she was destined to be a powerhouse attorney. I remembered how Dad boasted about Daniel's tech startup, even though half of it was smoke and mirrors. And me? When I told them I'd gotten promoted to project coordinator at the firm downtown, Mom's only reply was, "That's nice, but it's not really a career, is it?" That line replayed like an insult etched into my skin. The truth was becoming clear. I wasn't invisible because I didn't try hard enough. I was invisible because they only saw me when I was useful. My presence didn't matter. My sacrifices didn't matter. What mattered was that I filled the gaps in their lives quietly, without credit, without recognition. And when I wasn't filling those gaps, I might as well not exist. I sat up in bed, my fists clenched in the dark. Do you know that feeling when you suddenly see a pattern so clearly it almost blinds you? That's when I realized they never loved me for who I was. They only loved what I could provide. My mind drifted back to the family table, to their laughter, to the way no one dared to look at me as Dad dismissed me like I was a child. I thought about how my aunt looked down at her plate, how my cousin avoided eye contact, how even silence became a weapon they all wielded against me. The sadness that had weighed me down all night began to burn. Slowly, quietly, but steadily. Maybe I wasn't the problem. Maybe their blindness was. But the cruelest thought crept in as dawn broke through my curtains. They never saw me, only what I wasn't. The clinking of silverware filled the dining room. But the real noise was in the way my parents looked at Claire and Daniel, as if every word they spoke was gold. Daniel just signed another investor, Dad announced, his voice booming with pride. By next quarter, his startup will be worth double. The table erupted with approving murmurs. My uncle leaned forward, eyes wide. "That boy is going places," he said, nodding. I sat quietly, pushing peas around my plate. Claire smirked, sipping her wine. Well, not to brag, but I just won my first big case. The judge practically quoted my arguments in the ruling. Mom clasped her hands together like she'd just heard the best news in the world. "That's my daughter, a real fighter." Relatives clapped lightly, raising glasses in her honor. All I could think was, where was that applause when I spent nights bailing Claire out with her law school fees? The comparisons came swiftly, like knives. "Nicole," my aunt asked with a thin smile, "you're still working at, what was it? Some office job?" "Accounting firm downtown," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Dad chuckled, shaking his head. "She's not quite at Claire's level yet. But maybe one day." The laughter that followed was polite but sharp. Claire glanced at me, her smirk widening, feeding off the approval. Inside, I was crumbling. Every nod, every chuckle, every approving glance toward them was another reminder of my place in this family. The footnote. The filler, the invisible daughter, but I didn't speak. I didn't argue. I looked down at my plate and silently etched each word, each comparison, into my memory. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I was keeping score. The dinner ended, but the humiliation didn't. It clung to me like the scent of roasted chicken in my hair, stubborn and heavy. I walked out into the warm Arizona night, the sky painted in streaks of navy and gold. My heels clicked against the pavement as I tried to breathe, but the air felt thick, suffocating. They stripped me of my seat at the table, I whispered to myself, but not my voice. The words echoed in my head, louder than the laughter I'd left behind. I wandered down the street, past the rows of suburban houses with glowing porch lights. Each window I passed showed glimpses of families gathered, laughing, eating together. It felt like a cruel reminder of everything I didn't have. My chest ached. Was I really so worthless? So invisible? I thought about the years I'd bent over backward for them, the bills I'd paid, the sacrifices I'd made. None of it mattered. They never saw me, not as equal, not as worthy. Tears welled, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not where anyone could see. I reached a small park at the end of the street and sat on a cold bench, staring at the playground swings swaying in the wind. Childhood memories flickered, me pushing Claire on those very swings, Daniel chasing a soccer ball across the grass. Back then, I thought we were a team. But tonight proved the truth. I was never part of their team. I tilted my head back, staring at the sky littered with stars. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the heartbreak, something stirred. A spark. Maybe they could strip me of my seat. Maybe they could strip me of recognition. But they couldn't strip me of the fire inside me, and for the first time that night, I realized this wasn't my ending. This was the beginning of something else. I had lost their love, but I hadn't lost my power. Memories have a way of cutting deeper when you're already wounded. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the past came rushing back like a cruel slideshow. I was 8 when it started, when I first noticed how the scales tilted. Daniel scored a single goal at his soccer game, and the entire family celebrated like he'd won the World Cup. Ice cream, hugs, endless praise. That same week, I won first place in the school spelling bee. I came home clutching the certificate, my smile wide and nervous. Dad barely looked up from the newspaper. "That's nice, Nicole," he muttered. "But you really should try sports. They build character." I remember standing there, certificate in hand, feeling invisible. Years later, nothing had changed. Claire came home with her law school acceptance letter, and Mom called relatives, bragging like it was a Nobel Prize. I got accepted into Arizona State with a scholarship for accounting. Mom's response? "It's practical, I guess. No calls, no celebration. Just a shrug. Every flashback was another scar reopened. The times I babysat Claire's kids for free while she focused on her career. The weekends I skipped outings with friends so I could cover Dad's late mortgage payments. The nights I spent listening to Mom cry over bills, only to have her forget my birthday the following week. Ignored, overlooked, discarded. And yet, I had always shown up, but something was shifting in me now. As I replayed each slight, each dismissal, I realized I was no longer the little girl begging for approval. I wasn't the young woman hoping that one day they'd finally notice. I was changing. Every insult, every cold shoulder, every comparison. They weren't just wounds. They were fuel. Fuel I would use. The next family gathering was supposed to be casual. That's what Mom said when she called. But with my family, casual always turned into a performance. And I was the punchline. The table was full again, laughter spilling across the dishes. Daniel boasted about a new contract, Claire about her latest win in court. My parents glowed, their pride radiating across the room. And then the spotlight turned to me. "So, Nicole," Dad said with a smirk. "Still crunching numbers? You know, Daniel's work actually changes lives. Claire fights for justice. You balance books." Laughter followed, too sharp, too loud. Mom chimed in. "She's right, James. Nicole's steady at least. Reliable. Someone has to do the boring jobs, right?" Claire leaned forward, her eyes glittering. "It's true, Nicole. Not everyone can be extraordinary. Some people just keep the lights on." Daniel grinned, raising his glass. To Nicole, the unsung hero of mediocrity, the room erupted. Glasses clinked. Smirks surrounded me. I sat there, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Calm. Too calm. Inside, though, I felt the shards of myself tightening into something sharper. I didn't fight back. I didn't beg for respect. I simply watched them. Every word, every sneer, every smug smile, and I stored it all. Because broken glass doesn't beg. Broken glass cuts deepest. Revenge doesn't always begin with fire. Sometimes it starts in silence, in the quiet hours when no one is watching. I began noticing things my family overlooked. It started small. A stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter. Dad had left them there after one of his long rants about responsibility, but I saw the red stamps, past due, mortgage, utilities, even credit card debt piling high. Then I overheard Claire on the phone late one evening, her voice trembling as she spoke to a client. The great lawyer, usually untouchable, was begging for an extension. She hadn't told the family that her big firm was cutting costs, and she was on the edge of losing her partnership. Daniel wasn't much better. His new contract was nothing more than a seasonal gig, short-term work dressed up as success. The truth was, he was drowning in car payments and gym memberships he couldn't afford. Piece by piece. The illusion cracked, and I was watching. See, My job in accounting wasn't glamorous, but it gave me skills. Skills they mocked, but skills that let me see numbers for what they really were. The language of power. So, while they laughed at me, I quietly gathered details. I memorized due dates. I noticed overdraft notices. I listened to careless words dropped at the dinner table. I didn't need to confront them. Not yet. I just needed patience, because the more I uncovered, the clearer it became. Their empire wasn't as strong as they pretended. It was fragile, brittle. One wrong move and it would collapse, and there I was, the only one who understood the cracks. Beneath the surface, they thought I was weak, invisible, forgettable. But I was the one holding the thread of their empire. It didn't take long for the cracks to show in public at Aunt Linda's anniversary party. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and polished silverware. Relatives filled the tables, their voices warm with gossip and cheer. But beneath the surface, tension clung to my family like smoke. The night unraveled quickly. Dad raised his glass to toast the couple, but his hands shook. To Linda and George, he stammered. A murmur rippled through the room as his glass nearly slipped. His debts had finally started leaking into whispers. Then came Claire. She strutted in late, her dress elegant, her smile brittle. Someone asked about her big case, and I watched her face falter before she forced a laugh. "Confidential," she muttered, but people weren't fooled. Relatives exchanged glances, and I caught one whisper. "She's not doing as well as she says." And Daniel? He tried to brag about his job, but when pressed, he admitted it was temporary. The silence that followed was deafening. The mighty siblings, the proud parents, they were unraveling in front of everyone. And then it happened. Mom turned her frustration on me. "Nicole!" she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut the music. "If you weren't always so selfish, maybe we wouldn't be dealing with all this stress." Eyes turned. Dozens of them. Relatives, family friends, coworkers. A full audience. For a moment, I felt the familiar sting of humiliation. My chest tightened, my palms sweated, but then something shifted. Instead of answering, I stayed silent. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply let the silence stretch until it felt like a blade slicing through the air. And in that silence, their panic grew louder than any scream. Anger can be loud, but desperation whispers, it clings. It follows you even when you turn away. That's what my parents became. Desperate. After the cracks in their perfect mask began showing, their tone shifted. They weren't just insulting me anymore. They were trying to control me. One night, Dad came to my apartment. Not the proud man who once called me the most useless child, but a man whose shoulders sagged under invisible weight. He stood in my doorway like a stranger, eyes darting around at the modest furniture, the neatly stacked bills on my counter that were actually paid. "Nicole," he started, his voice uneven, "you don't understand how hard things are right now. You need to support this family, do your part, do my part. After years of being told I wasn't part of them." I looked at him, waiting for the words that never came. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a plea disguised as authority. The next morning, Mom called. Her voice, once sharp as glass, was soft, almost trembling. "Sweetheart, your father and we may have been too harsh. We need you with us, for appearances. For family. Appearances. Family." Words they had used like weapons, now suddenly offered like bandages. That's when the question burned in me. One I'll ask you too. Would you forgive your parents, or let them face their storm? Because I knew what forgiveness would mean. It would mean erasing every wound, every humiliation, every moment they made me feel like less than nothing, and I wasn't ready to erase. Not yet. I saw their fear. I saw the way they looked at me now, like I had become the mirror reflecting all their failures back at them. And the strangest thing, that fear didn't crush me. It lifted me. For the first time, I wasn't beneath them. I was above. Their desperation became my crown. Downfall doesn't arrive quietly. It crashes, shatters, and leaves dust in its wake. And for my parents, it happened in the place they feared most. Publicly. It was at a community fundraiser, the kind of event they lived for. The hall was dressed in lights, tables lined with silver platters, the air thick with polite laughter. My parents walked in, dressed sharp, heads high, still pretending to be untouchable. But whispers followed them like shadows. People already knew. The debts, the cracks, The lies. Halfway through the evening, Claire tried to make a speech. She stood by the podium, chin high, ready to play the role of the successful lawyer. But her voice shook. She stumbled over words, her notes trembling in her hands. A relative muttered, not quietly enough, "Didn't she just lose her case?" The crowd shifted, restless. Then Daniel chimed in, desperate to cover the silence. He bragged about his contract, but someone from the audience laughed. "That's not even permanent, is it?" The laughter spread, low at first, then louder. And my parents? Their faces drained. Mom hissed at me across the room, "Do something. Fix this." But I stayed where I was, calm, silent, watching, because this wasn't my storm to fix. And then came the final blow. A family friend, one of Dad's closest allies, approached him in front of everyone. "You've borrowed money from half this room. When are you paying it back?" Gasps. Murmurs. The room tilted against them. My parents stammered, their voices breaking, but the crowd wasn't merciful. For years they had stood tall, bragged, compared, humiliated. Now the same audience watched them crumble, and for the first time in my life, their voices trembled. Not mine. Begging. I never thought I'd see the day my parents would kneel. Not physically, but with their pride stripped away. Yet there they were, voices cracked, faces pale, no trace of the authority they once wielded like a blade against me. It happened in our living room, the same place where they once called me not ready, the same walls that absorbed years of humiliation. Now those walls heard something else. Their pleas. "Nicole," Mom whispered, her eyes wet. "We were wrong. We need you." Her words hung in the air like fragile glass. I could have shattered them with silence. But instead, I breathed deeply, steady, aware of the weight of this moment. Dad's voice broke next. "We didn't mean what we said. We were proud, stupid, but this family can't survive without you. Without your strength. The very thing they used to deny I had. Now it was the currency they begged for. I could feel every eye on me. Relatives, friends, even neighbors who had witnessed my humiliation over the years. They waited to see if I would bend, if I would erase it all with a nod. But I didn't bend. I rose. "Respect," I said quietly but firmly. "That's the first condition. You don't speak to me as less." Not ever again. Their faces twitched. It wasn't the word they expected. They wanted forgiveness. But forgiveness without truth is just silence dressed as peace. "Dignity," I continued. "You will treat me with the same dignity you flaunted for yourselves." At the table, in public, in private, Mom's lip trembled. Dad nodded, hesitant but cornered. "And boundaries," I added, voice sharper now. "You don't get to control me anymore. Not my choices. Not my life. If I choose to walk away, I walk. And you will not chase me with guilt." The room was still, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm, or after one has finally broken. I looked at them. Not with hate, but with a clarity that came from every wound they'd ever given me. They wanted forgiveness as a shield. But what I offered wasn't a shield. It was a mirror. I gave them a choice. Not forgiveness, but truth. Revenge was never the goal. For a long time, I thought it was. I thought every sleepless night, every tear, every humiliation was leading me to a grand moment of revenge. But standing in the quiet after everything fell apart, I realized something deeper. It wasn't the revenge I wanted. It was dignity. I remember walking outside that night, the air cool against my skin, the streetlights painting long shadows across the pavement. My parents had given me everything I needed without knowing it. Not gifts, not love, but the strength to stand alone. I thought of every dinner where I was compared to Claire. Every gathering where relatives nodded in agreement as I was belittled. Every time they said I wasn't enough. Those weren't just moments of pain. They were chisels, carving me into someone unbreakable. And I wondered, how many of you watching have felt the same? How many of you have been told you were less? That you weren't ready, weren't worthy, weren't enough? Because here's the truth. Being silenced can either bury you or force you to find your voice. For me, it was the latter. I didn't walk away with their love. I didn't walk away with their approval, but I walked away with something stronger. Myself, and that's what I had been missing all along. When I looked back one final time, I realized the betrayal wasn't in being denied a seat at their table. The slap of betrayal wasn't at the table, it was in their words. But those words became the reason I found my voice. And no one will silence me again.